talk about a reasonable degree of wealth, and also you start to project forward to a few of the things that you talked about with, what's going to happen when I've got 3 kids, I've got 5 kids, and they're all going to have partners, and odds are that one of them or 2 of them are going to have a relationship that breaks down at some point. You start to think about there's probably a 4th order consequence of how you structure things.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners at Burke, Britton Financial Partners. Ben, this hopefully be a quick one, but we're just talking off air about sort of common questions we're getting from clients at the moment, and the common theme amongst a lot of our conversations has been there's a group of people, they tend to be sort of maybe 45 to 55-year-olds that are interested in 2 directions with their family. On the way below them, it is their kids and wanting to support their kids, either getting into the property market, helping them with a small business, or maybe with education, and looking up at their parents. It is worried about their parents' retirement, their movement into maybe support at home, aged care, support at home, or moving into aged care or retirement living. So we've got no agenda on this one. We just thought we'd riff on that type of client or that type of person and the people out there that are in that age bracket that are concerned about how they help their kids and how they help their parents.
I think they get caught in that really, it's sort of like a pivot where they're right in the middle, because maybe through the previous decade it's been their focus on their kids, and their parents have probably been still maybe in good enough health and capacity to manage their own situation, but then they get into that point, and yet it's very generalistic. There's always people outside of it, but that 45 to 55 bracket is the most common. Their parents are maybe starting to age, or maybe even lost one of their parents, and they've got a single parent who's struggling to maintain the home, or even just maintain their finances. Like often there's one dominant party in that, then they're starting to lean on their kids for support just to pay the bills or have an understanding of internet banking or whatever it might be, because often for that generation they haven't grown up with a lot of technology unless they used it through maybe the back end of their work life. It's completely foreign to them. So those people are getting pulled in many directions. They're probably also trying to manage their own mortgage, their household wealth. They've got their kids that are coming out of maybe school or in high school, want to set them up for the next generation.
You're talking straight to me, aren't you?
I was just looking you dead in the eye.
Yeah. So. And it is actually I'm right in that bracket, and I actually hadn't thought about that until
just sort of realised this
dawned
bang on you.
Yeah, but when you have kids and you think, okay, these are my responsibility, you don't necessarily have a great picture of what the future is going to look like and where your responsibilities are going to lie. You probably got some thought around sort of helping your kids when they're becoming, they're maturing and finishing year 12 and off into the real world. One of the things I didn't really think about was, my parents and my in-laws, and I'm experiencing that at the moment with Kari's folks, needing some support with moving into retirement villages and needing some support at home, and just all the financial implications around that. And I know that we've talked about it on previous podcasts about lots and lots of decision points. Maybe if we start with the looking after our parents, there's lots and lots of decision points that people need to consider and that people are worried about, and sort of the problems that people are presented with, like what do we do with mum and dad? How do we actually support them either to stay in their home, or how the hell are we going to be able to afford to fund them into a retirement village or into aged care?
Well, even before the actual financial component of it is having the tools in place to be able to assist them, whether that may be going to the bank for them or paying some bills. So sort of taking it back one step is being organised enough to make sure they've got their powers of attorney in place and those documents we talk a lot about. So making sure that there's some framework there and that everyone's aware of who is going to take those roles on. It might not be that they're needing it right now, but there will come a point in time where they highly likely they will need them.
In one of our previous episodes, I think we talked about sort of a financial stock take of those kind of things. And when is the best time to deal with that? It's yesterday. When's the next best time? It's today, because you can continue to kick the can down the road until all of a sudden mum and dad need support and you don't have financial power of attorney for them. You don't know what their assets are. That's another one where people are presenting to us as the key representative for their family, yet they don't have insight into what mum and dad actually has, and it becomes pretty difficult trying to do that after the fact. Maybe parents have lost capacity, or mum and dad are not conversant with, or maybe they don't want you to know.
And that's been a challenge where people are obviously private about these things. I think that barrier is being reduced. Like, people are much more open about that now, and also they're wanting to maybe help earlier too. Like, they're wanting to have that generational sort of flow of funds happening down earlier, so they can see it happening, which is really tricky. And again, always for our clients, I think the number one thing is when they ask us about that is you've got to make sure you're sweet first. Like, if their household is not in order and their financial situation isn't bulletproof, they're going to compromise their own ability. And sometimes they do accept that compromise. Like, they'll go, okay, well, we're going to spend a bit less, or we're going to work a bit longer. But you need to know where you're at first before you start helping up or down the chain. Helping up, again, there's dangers on both sides when we talk about going, aged care and that side of things. You have to be very careful about what you might compromise for that person's wills and wishes, as well as their entitlements and benefits from Centrelink or aged care system. So you go and pay their bond for their aged care facility. There's 1,000 different issues that have come off the back of that in terms of the estate.
Better make sure you get along with your siblings.
Yeah, good luck. But again, even if you have really good relationships, when that all falls out and people say, oh, there won't be a worry, there might not be. The funds might end up where they need to, but Mr. Centrelink or Mr. ATO, they might not be happy about it, and someone's going to feel some pain off the back of that.
On the helping people down, like parents supporting their kids, and I'm thinking about an example in the last couple of days where if it wasn't for clients actually receiving advice, they didn't have the insight to say that's probably not a good idea. Like you mentioned, you got to first look after yourself first, and one of our primary objectives as a financial advisor is to have our clients' best interests. And one of our superpowers is to be able to be removed from a client situation enough to say, listen, I know you want to support in that manner, but you actually do have to. Here's the consequences of you being able to afford your lifestyle moving forward. So both up and down, I think the ability to be able to consider what the implications are. I mean, the second and third order consequences of supporting your parents, you mentioned Centrelink, of being able to support yourself. And the one that I suppose is really common when you're talking about that 45 to 50-year-old bracket that are trying to support their kids, and maybe a little bit older. It could probably stretch out to sort of 65-year-olds even that are helping their kids, or even people helping their grandchildren. We're seeing more and more, particularly with property, the inability for kids to be able to get into the property market. Yet we've got a group of parents and grandparents that want their kids to have a similar experience that they did, that they want them to be property owners. They want them to own their own home. What have you seen in terms of the challenges of being able to support people, being able to support their kids and grandkids into properties or into assets, or into the investment market as early as they possibly can? One
of the biggest things is that not many people just have one or two children. They have families of 3, 4, 5, and fairness and evenness for them across the board is super important to them. If they help one, they want to be able to help the other equally. Then unless they're twins, they're not the same age. So you might have 5, 6, 7, 10 years gap between the children. So the value of what one gift at one point was versus the value of that 10 years later might be far, far different. So setting up processes, structures, and having an outline of what they will do, making sure it's fair, but making sure it doesn't compromise themselves. And I think there's this, and I've had this a few times recently, where they say, oh, we've got 3 kids, we want to try and have a property for each of them, or we want to have a property for the 3 of them. And I get the one property per child can work okay. It's obviously a lot of money if you can fund it. The one that I really worry about is the property for our kids, because if you project forward, those kids will most likely have a partner. So if you have 3 kids, 3 partners, you've now got 6 people, which will have 6 potentially differing opinions on what that property is for them in the future.
Different financial needs, different interests.
You know, one might think one might live in it. Maybe they all move into it initially. That's probably maybe the plan for the parents. Let's get a property, they live in it, it's theirs, they can control it. It's that next, as you said, the second and third layer in action off the back of that where it gets messy. And it's almost like having a business with a shareholder agreement. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens?
Yeah, what's the best time to put that shareholders agreement in place?
Yeah, before. But the kids potentially, when this is happening, are kids. Like, they might be doing it now when they're 12, 14, 16, projecting for 10 years. Who knows where they lie at that?
Well, hopefully it's earlier. And I think one of the points that nearly all of our clients that have had family members, we would argue, and we're seeing, I had an example, I think I mentioned it on a previous podcast, where I had a client maybe that started as an investor through their parents, so the money was held in trust, is now a 20-year client. And that money has actually supported that client to move into property and other investments. So the earlier that you can start, but I mean, historically, when you thought about investing for your kids, maybe if you had some level of sophistication, you might have had a managed fund in trust for the kids. So it was in mum's name as the low income earner for that child. When you start to talk about a reasonable degree of wealth, and also you start to project forward to a few of the things that you talked about with, what's going to happen when I've got 3 kids, I've got 5 kids, and they're all going to have partners, and, odds are that one of them or 2 of them are going to have a relationship that breaks down at some point. You start to think about there's probably a 4th order consequence of how you structure things. The earlier you can start that conversation about how you invest for the kids, the structure of how you invest for the kids, the type of investment that you invest for the kids, because some of the unintended consequences of investing for kids could be tax complications. So
tax and risk, I think, when you have multiple kids, and what I've probably preferenced a few times recently is having an individual investment account for each of those. So recently I did one, I think there was 4 children, ages varied by about 6 or 8 years, so 4 different children. So the risk tolerance and the risk required from a tenure point of view of those investments was very different for the older kids versus the younger ones. Now, the other side is, how do you keep these somewhat even between them as well? So putting those 4 amounts aside early in their own individual accounts, I think blending them together can also get messy. Knowing that they may access some but not all of those funds at a point on their journey. So it might be they need a small assistance for their first car, or maybe some education funding. Maybe there's some travel. Who knows what might be in there? But building up to maybe a house or a wedding or something. There's going to be all these different events that parents often want to contribute towards. Now, having a guide and having a pool of wealth set aside for those events means it can be called upon at different stages through that journey. And it's not an all or nothing. It's not like, we've got to find this much. You've got that money set aside that you've been accumulating for the first, maybe 18 years of their life, ready for these events. If they need some, and it will come at different times in different orders. It won't be youngest to oldest. That's a simple way to look at it. But potentially one of the factors, they take some, the balance stays there. They might not need it for another decade. Well, let's make sure it continues to keep pace with inflation, and you use that as a simple market metric to make sure it's still fair and equitable for all the kids.
In that structure, just of 3 kids, 3 segregated policies, are they individually owned? Were they in a family trust?
Depends. Often, without going too deep into it, sometimes using structures like family trusts, or maybe it's a company, can be used. Often informal trusts, which are probably something that not many people are aware of, but it's basically a trust without all of the documentation that goes with it, and has its own rules and regulations around it. But the key is it's tagged and purposeful. It's for this child. There's their name. It's noted there for them, and at a point in time, whether some of those funds or the actual investment itself could become theirs. So I've got, similar story. We've got a couple of clients, and parents set them up early, migrated it into their name. They kept adding money in themselves for a period of time. They drew out a lump sum. They bought their first home. They continued to invest into that managed fund setup. Got through another decade or so, and now they'll probably lean on those funds again, because they're going to turn that initial property into now more of a family, longer term property. So again, that's sort of the they've sort of followed that journey almost exactly how we might have mapped it. It's a little bit different for everyone. So flexibility is key.
Makes me think a little bit about the sort of the family group mentality that we tend to, the way we view our clients in here as a family group, and thinking about that 45 to 50-year-old demographic that carries a fairly significant burden. At the moment, they're carrying a significant burden of caring for kids, caring for their parents, and as you said, they're probably also, dealing with a mortgage, maybe a small business, have got their own tax issues to deal with. I think they are, if people out there listening and are like me, can kind of relate to the fact that you've got parents that need support, kids that you want to look after, and you're trying to spin the wheels on your own situation, you're probably the person that if you're not seeking advice, it's probably worthwhile reaching out.
Well, I think if I project forward, if we say you're in the thick of it, that I'm, say, 15 years behind where you are in your life journey. If I project forward and say, okay, in 15 years, my parents will be, into their 70s and Imi would be 16 at that point in time. You're starting to, it quickly translates across into that. So what can I do in the next 15 years to make sure that I know where she's at? And also having those communications early with your parents, well before, 15 years will go. It goes quickly. It sounds as cliche as it is. So what can you do over that next 15 years? The key is starting early, because don't leave it 10 or don't think I've got 15 years to deal with it. Like really, the earlier you can have some actions, the easier it's going to be when you get into that zone. Yeah.
Start early, but it's never too late.
You've got to start at some point, but earlier is better.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether starting early is starting early aged care planning for your parents. It's late in the journey, but it's early in the process of what they're dealing with at the time. So anything else to add on this, mate? I know we could deep dive into every aspect of kids' investments, tax management and business planning for 45 to 50-year-olds and aged care planning. But is there anything else before we close this one out?
No, I think maybe rolling on to maybe next week or next topic will be maybe talking a little bit more about structures. So again, I think what we're seeing is that we've got a significant amount of wealth that's rolling through at this point, and that's going to get bigger over the next decade. I think mid sort of 2030s is when that's at its peak. So there's a lot more structures coming online. And people are more aware of structures. So when we say structures, we're talking about companies, family trusts, testamentary trusts, unit trusts. There's heaps of different ways that can look. So I think talking about how they operate and how that can be a massive part of that intergenerational wealth transfer from a protection point of view, as well as the legacy piece. I think that's probably the next natural topic that rolls through off the back of this.
Beautiful. I think the other one that we were talking about, just in terms of a bit of nuance in terms of investment asset classes and types, ETFs, index funds, actively managed funds. So we've gone all the way from talking about people that need support to the trust they use to the underlying investments that they might invest in. So that's plenty. It's 20 minutes, mate. Let's cut it short there, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thanks, Jay.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Burke Britton FP, or Google Burke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to, don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.